You don't want to yell, but sometimes the anger takes over before you can stop it. And afterward, you're left with guilt, distance, and the awful sense that it's becoming a pattern. But without a new approach, that pattern will keep repeating, and it chips away at the connection you're trying to build. This video breaks down the key takeaways from Angry Parent, Angry Child, with clear practical shifts you can start using today. So you can respond instead of react, and create a calmer home where your kids actually feel safe and understood. Let's begin by entering the world of Angry Parent, Angry Child, where the first idea we explore is that anger itself is not the enemy, but how we express it matters deeply. Khang invites us to recognize that anger is a normal human emotion. It can arise from frustration, disappointment, or unmet needs. Yet, beyond that, she challenges parents to distinguish between healthy expressions of anger and damaging outbursts. Rather than judging ourselves for feeling angry, she urges us to notice when that anger starts to escalate. In doing so, we can choose to channel it rather than allow it to control our reactions. From there, we move into the realm of inner triggers and physiological signals. Before the anger ever becomes loud, our bodies are already reacting. Khang teaches that there are warning signs, clenched fists, a quickened heartbeat, tension in the chest, that offer a chance to pause. Moreover, she encourages parents to map out the triggers that are uniquely theirs, for example, feeling disrespected, being interrupted, fear of losing control. In short, self-knowledge becomes the first line of defense. Because when we know our patterns, we can learn to intervene early. Then we shift attention outward, to how children communicate through behavior. Khang reframes misbehavior, tantrums, and defiance not as attempts to annoy or undermine us, but as expressions of unmet needs. Children aren't always capable of naming their emotional states, so their demands, pushback, or emotional storms are often shorthand for exhaustion, frustration, confusion, or need for connection. In this light, our role becomes less about punishment and more about curiosity. What is this behavior trying to tell me? What need lies underneath? Once we understand that, we embrace a much more constructive direction, turning discipline into collaborative problem-solving rather than authoritarian control. Instead of commanding, threatening, or punishing under volatile emotions, Khang encourages parents to engage children in finding solutions together. This approach helps kids feel heard and invested rather than simply forced to comply. By framing issues as shared problems, how can we avoid this again? Families build respectful communication and co-ownership over behavior. Of course, these changes only truly take root when we pause to look at the long shadow parental anger casts on children. Khang underscores the fact that children often mirror the emotional patterns they see. Over time, persistent exposure to reactive parenting can affect their self-esteem, emotional regulation, and even their brain development. When parents model yelling or harsh responses as normal, children internalize those as relational norms. Thus, one of the most powerful things a parent can do is become a living example of calm, regulation, and emotional balance. But ideas alone don't shift habits. That brings us to the next major dimension, which is managing one's own emotional health through practices like mindfulness, journaling, and self-soothing strategies. Because parents often run on depleted reserves, Khang insists that we build systems of emotional resilience. She suggests cultivating self-awareness, pausing when we sense internal escalation, and using tools such as breathing, walking, or brief reflection to diffuse tension. In other words, before we can guide children toward emotional stability, we must steward our own. Finally, as our last pivot in this summary, Khang calls us to embed self-care and healthy routines as non-negotiables in parenting. She argues that prioritizing sleep, movement, proper nutrition, and regular downtime is not indulgent. It's foundational if we want to show up as calmer parents. Equally, establishing morning and evening rituals, shared family habits, and predictable structure helps reduce anxiety for everyone in the household. Over time, consistent routines become scaffolding for emotional balance, helping buffer the triggers and stressors that so often lead us back into anger. As I've just woven those ideas together, what you've heard are the 7 guiding themes that propel Angry Parent, Angry Child. To recap in narrative fashion. First, we begin by accepting that anger isn't the villain. It's how it's handled that shapes outcomes. On that basis, we train ourselves to notice internal warning signs, stepping in before the emotional cascade begins. Then we turn our gaze to children's behavior, seeing it as communication rather than defiance. That understanding allows us to shift from reactive discipline toward co-created solutions. Along the way, Khang compels us to see how our emotional states imprint onto our children, so our internal work becomes part of their healthy development. To sustain change, we adopt mindfulness, journaling, self-regulation tools, and then anchor it all by making self-care and consistent routines structural in our lives.